This is a Squiz podcast. We're your shortcut to being informed. The Weekly Wrap is the week in news and what's coming up. I'm Kate Watson.
And I'm Claire Kimball. So outside of talking through the US election result, of course, we've got HECS. There was a related policy announcement from the Prime Minister this week, an update on upgrades as well. Also the Melbourne Cup.
Yeah, the death and legacy of Quincy Jones as well. The AFLW finals are upon us. Mostly, though, it's the US election. Let's do it. No time to waste today, Claire. Straight into the most covered story of the week, which was also the most searched for news story. It's the US election result. There are a lot of ways to tackle this one, so we'll divide it into three. First, what we know about how America voted, the varying perspectives on what it means for Australia, and what happens now, including those outstanding criminal convictions. Of course, I'm talking about President-elect Donald Trump.
Yeah, that sounds very good. You know how my brain works in threes, so that makes a lot of sense.
Starting with how the vote went down, more than half of those who cast their ballot voted for Donald Trump. So he won the popular vote. That's what that means. He passed the 270 Electoral College votes required to become president. As for how population groups voted, let's stick with the exit polling from Edison. So there's a number of exit polls that get done, but their data is the one being cited across all the news coverage that you might be seeing.
Yeah, so let's just pause on that for a second because exit polls aren't really a thing for us here in Australian elections.
Why?
Well, I think they can kind of, because it's compulsory voting, you can actually look at the result and work out kind of what happened.
Yeah, and you can look at the census.
Exactly.
And then align.
You can match it all up.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, exactly. So in the
But they're a thing in the US.
They're definitely a thing in the US, and it made me certainly wonder, I know it did you too, how do those actually work? Like what is that information base that they're drawing upon? So these exit polls are conducted via in-person, either at the polling booth on the day of the election or for those early voters who are going to voting centres and actually doing it that way. They just want to really capture what people, who they are and what they did with their vote.
You didn't say the word interviews, but they actually interview people. Yeah. So they
in person.
They talk, so kind of like mini focus groups, and then they deduce from the data what who those people are and how they obviously ask them how they voted. As for those who mail it in, how do they do phone calls?
Yeah,
text messages.
Exactly, phone calls, text surveys. That's a really big part of it too, because about a quarter of the American population that voted that way. So you need to include those in it. In the United States, the major news organisations, so there's four of them, that's NBC, ABC, CBS and CNN, they all participate in what's called the National Election Pool. That pool draws on these exit polls from Edison. Edison are a really big research agency. So when you see any of the news coverage referring to exit polls, chances are this is the data they're talking about.
That's what they're talking about. It's 100,000 people that they capture across the country. That's all a long way of saying this is the business. This is what everyone's talking about now. What we've done, Claire, in the way that we do is listen to a lot of journalists and experts talk about how they're interpreting the exit polls and how they're coming to what they think might have happened with this result. What they're saying, and we'll start with women, is it was anticipated there'd be a bit of a force, like women would come out in force for Kamala Harris. That didn't seem to work out the way many expected.
Not in the numbers that they expected. So she received 54% of the female vote compared to 44% from Donald Trump when you look at women as a big group. So yes, more women voted for Kamala Harris than they did for Donald Trump. But when you drill into the details, the Democrats actually went backwards. So it looks like in 2020, about 57% of women voted for Joe Biden. So 54 is not quite as much as 57. More white women voted for Donald Trump, which is something I had to check and clock a couple of times. It's just really interesting when you look at the racial divide. Trump won that by a margin of 6 points. Black women overwhelmingly came out for Harris, though. She led by 85 points there.
A bit was said in the campaign too about young men, of course, and how they were going to vote. Actually, not a bit. heaps
lot
was said about young men and how they were going to vote. 56% of men between the ages of 18 and 29 voted for Donald Trump. For young women, so the same age group, 58% preferred Harris. So there is a real divide there.
There really is. And there's a gender divide in the Latino vote as well. So Harris won Latina women. The story with men, though, is really, really interesting. So in 2016, Hillary Clinton won Latino men by 31 points. In 2020, Biden won them by 23 points. This time around, Donald Trump won them by 10 points.
Yeah, just listening to some of the commentary on that. In particular, I listened to the Rest is Politics podcast, which you and I have talked about before. They reminded me that Donald Trump actually made a very direct pitch to those men, basically saying to them, migrants coming into America are taking your jobs. This is going to affect you the most, your livelihood, your families. Perhaps that message landed.
Yeah, perhaps it did. Exactly right.
I heard Kellyanne Conway as well was quoted saying, she in 2016 she said, and I thought this was really interesting, it gave me pause for thought, she was a Trump advisor in the previous administration, her quote being that there's a difference for voters between things that offend them and things that affect them. Which makes you stop and think about when it comes to the way Donald Trump talks about race, identity, women, men, gender. People might actually care a lot more about their livelihoods than whether they're being offended personally.
Yeah, exactly right. And there will be a lot more said about that in the coming weeks and months, that's for sure.
Yeah, immigration was one thing. Abortion, though, was another. Lots very concerned about women's rights under a second Trump presidency.
Yeah, and probably notable to call out too, there were 10 states where there was a question put to them in this election by their states about enshrining abortion rights into the state constitutions. So we won't go into all of those, but some of those states voted in favour of doing that, even though at the same time they voted for Donald Trump. So it's just another observation around these two things happening at the same time.
Yeah, and whether those issues, whether Trump and abortion or Trump and not abortion are linked. You can see all the commentary just searching for answers as to how this happened. That's race and gender. Let's look at class, particularly Trump's increasing strength amongst working class voters. Trump's always outperformed past Republican candidates in the working class category, particularly of white voters. This time he won 66% of their vote. That's high.
It's really high. And independent senator, a former Democrat, Bernie Sanders, had quite a bit to say about that. What he had to say became a real talking point straight after the election. So he says that the Democrats have abandoned working class people. He says while the very rich are doing phenomenally well, 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, and we have more income and wealth inequality than ever before.
Yeah, he reckons those people wanted their cost of living concerns addressed, but Harris and the Democrats just didn't do that in this campaign. Lots saying there's much to that argument, also that people weren't happy with the way the Biden administration approached the economy, and they were feeling a lot more pain than they were under a Trump presidency before. Maybe Trump just benefited from being the incumbent. Who knows? It's so interesting listening to all these podcasts because it is this
you can match
around.
A theory to all sorts of
and there'll be
outcomes,
so much, but all of it is bedded in this data. But the long and the short of it all is that Trump saw gains in almost every demographic.
Yeah, and including when you really drill into the Democratic parts of the country as well. So New York,
California.
He did have gains. More people voted for Trump in those parts of the world than ever before as well.
Yeah, so the interesting thing, I guess, just globally, if a big part of the reason they did that, still an if, but if cost of living and the pain people are feeling is the reason, this isn't an issue isolated to America. There's been a bit said this week about voters around the world voting against inflation. So keep that in mind, I guess, as we head to an Australian election, which brings us to why it matters for Australia and what this all means for Australia.
Yeah, exactly. So Prime Minister Anthony Albanese got a call into Trump to congratulate him on the win. Does
he call him or does Trump call, Trump calls, doesn't he?
No, I think you have to call him to say well done.
Oh.
I don't think you're waiting on him to say.
I thought he had a list of world
it?
leaders he would call.
I'm sure there'll be some that he would,
Yeah.
but no, I think it's protocol that the incumbent leader of a nation
But
reaches
surely
out
it's
to
like,
the winner.
here's your time slot to make the call.
I'm sure there's a bit of arrangement happening, for sure. It's not like Trump's waiting by the phone for Anthony Albanese to call him.
No, there must be this is your time in your diary to take calls from world leaders.
How lucky am I to get a call?
Yeah, we've told Albo that he has to call at 9:45. Yeah, I'm sure that's how it happens. Anyway,
look,
side issue.
To get back on track. So a lot of people who have been in politics for a while, like Anthony Albanese, have had a bit to say about Donald Trump in the past.
And I guess not expecting that, because it is so history-making for him to be re-elected after that 4-year break. It happened, its first time
in 100 years.
In 100 and something years.
Yeah.
He probably thought it wouldn't be a problem because he's not going to be president again.
Well, and here we are. In 2017, what Albanese said about Trump is that he scares the swear word, starting with S, out of him. But this week, Albanese said it's all good. It's going to be fine. He said, we talked about the importance of the alliance and the strength of the Australia-US relationship in security, trade and investment. Coalition leader Peter Dutton, though, has another view of Trump.
Yeah, this week he said he's not somebody to be scared of, but somebody that we can work very closely with. We're going to need to do that because there's a bit going on between our nations. AUKUS is the main point of nervousness. We've talked on the podcast before about Donald Trump not liking these big global arrangements and these global alliances necessarily, or at least questioning them.
Yeah, and there's a specific issue with AUKUS as well, which is that under the agreement, the United States is going to sell us some nuclear-powered subs. That kicks off in 2032, which isn't actually that far away. The thought is that Trump might want to keep those subs, though, for the United States because their manufacturing capacity is very limited. There's been a bit said about us actually buying that capacity from the United States and that the US might actually want to hold on to those subs for themselves, particularly if he's keen to take on China again. So lots of concerns as well for our exporters because Trump has said that he's going to impose a universal tariff of about 10 to 20% on imports into the United States. Last year, just to give you the numbers around what that might mean for us, more than 12,000 Australian companies exported into the United States, the value of about $15 billion worth of goods. It's a lot of it duty-free, so it's going to be an issue.
Tariffs being taxes, so what you're saying there is that it could cost a lot more to import into the US under a Trump administration unless our government does deals with America. So this is to the point of the relationship.
Yeah, and we've got a free trade deal, so changing all of that is a big thing. It's going to be a big thing. So whoever is in place in our government will need to work very closely with them to try and get the best possible deal for Australia.
Someone critical to that could be the US ambassador.
Very good point. So former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd is our man in Washington at the moment. In the past, Rudd has said a few things about Donald Trump. He's called him a traitor to the West. He's called him the most destructive president in history. Trump called him nasty.
Yeah, people might remember Trump did an interview with Nigel Farage. This was a very random story. He's a sort of a right-wing UK commentator.
Politician.
Former politician.
He's in the parliament.
He's still in the parliament.
He got elected.
He got elected, he did. And there was these really weird questions about Kevin Rudd sort of in the middle of the interview, and that's when Donald Trump said he seems a bit nasty.
Yeah, I remember you and I paused going, why in that interview were there questions about
it was big news.
Kevin Rudd? It was a news moment this year, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So what Farage did was read out some of Kevin Rudd's tweets and that got that response from Donald Trump. What Trump said, he went on to say he won't be there for long if that's the case. So, look, his former colleagues, the Prime Minister, Penny Wong, our Foreign Minister, says, look, our government's pretty relaxed about Rudd being there, that it's going to be fine, and Rudd has since deleted the tweets as well.
Yeah, the obvious place to go now, and it's a bit of there's one side issue of a whole big conversation about the change that's going to happen because Donald Trump is now the president again of the United States.
And you know what, just before you move on to the next bit, thinking this week, the last 4 years of what we've done with Squiz in covering US politics, I reckon would be a tenth of what we did in our first 4 years, which was the Trump term, it's going to be all of these conversations again because he's so disruptive.
Yeah, and he will do things quickly is what he said, and he's already
And they're big.
started doing them and they're big. Exactly.
And they're against the orthodoxy. It's just all big stuff, yeah.
So to what's next? As I said, he's the president-elect. Inauguration day is the 20th of January. The vote will be certified on the 6th of January. That's the anniversary of the riots on the Capitol in 2021. Just a coincidence?
Well, no, that's the date that they actually...
Oh, and that's they always do
and
it.
inaugurations on that date. So it's a different vibe this time around, of
Very
course.
different vibe. There's also, particularly because of his criminal convictions.
Exactly. So Trump has faced 4 simultaneous criminal prosecutions. He was convicted in one of those cases over his attempt to cover up, that was hush money payments to the adult film star Stormy Daniels during the 2016 campaign. He's due to be sentenced for that on the 26th of November.
Yeah, the immediate goal, I guess, and what everyone's saying of Trump's legal team is to get that postponed indefinitely or dismissed potentially.
The fact that it can just be dismissed blows my mind.
Yeah.
Because they've been through this whole process and they've found him guilty. So how do you then go, oh, he's just the president, so we won't do that anymore? It's not as random as it seems. Of course, if you're thinking about the US legal system and everyone's treated equally, they are treated equally unless you're the president.
Well, it's a very unique job.
Yeah, and exactly. And it goes back into a little bit that's happened this year as well. What has happened in the Supreme Court, there was a decision that granted a president some presidential immunity. So there's already some questions in the works about whether that conviction would stick.
Right. We actually, you read everything, you listen to everything, and everyone's like, we don't really know, but surely his legal team's working on overdrive for that 26th of November date. On top of this is federal criminal charges. Trump said that he would fire the prosecutor who brought the cases over his attempts to overturn his election defeat and retention of classified documents after leaving office. He said he would do that within 2 seconds of being sworn in.
2 seconds.
That's the first thing he's
Maybe from the inauguration ceremony, if that's the case. And Jack Smith, you're fired.
Yeah.
I don't know. But there's also reports already that the Justice Department has already started evaluating how to really wind down those 2 federal criminal cases. They were working that out just in case he won the election.
And that's because of a long-standing department policy we've got written down here that a sitting president can't be prosecuted.
Yeah, so that's been the policy, not just of recent times, but over a whole period of time. And, of course, Trump's situation is unique because they've never really gone after a president before.
And this was all new territory for everyone, but it is certainly something to look out for. And what many are saying is that Trump's winning the presidency has been handy in more ways than one.
He's got the White House and he's cleared up his criminal case issues.
After my divorce, I couldn't afford the mortgage by myself, let alone all the other costs. Hosting on Airbnb was the only solution that kept me afloat and allowed me to stay in my home. It keeps me busy, especially on top of 2 other jobs, but hosting gives me independence and control over my future.
Hosting on Airbnb has become a lifeline for many Australians. That's why we want to work with governments to find solutions that benefit the whole community. Find out more at airbnb.com/stronger together.
There was other news this week, believe it or not, Claire, just on local politics. A reminder that last week the podcast was all about our MPs and upgrades and whether they should be accepting upgrades from airlines.
Doesn't that feel like a million years ago?
A long time ago. This week we saw the opposition spokesperson, Bridget McKenzie. She was the one who came out really hard to criticise Anthony Albanese for what he'd been accused of, which was 22 upgrades, some of which when he was Transport Minister. What she said this week is that, I accidentally haven't declared 16 upgrades, personal travel and professional travel. This one seems, I heard someone say on the radio, it's sort of neutralised the issue a little bit because they might all be as bad as each other.
I don't think there's any sense that it's just confined to one side of politics
No.
rather than the other. And going after these issues is sort of mutually assured destruction because they've both got issues.
They've both got issues. I guess the one sticking point is that Anthony Albanese was Transport Minister at the time, and then there's a conversation about influence. And if you haven't listened to my interview with Joe Aston, who's the guy that wrote the Chairman's Lounge and the reason this is a whole thing, please go back and listen to it. Because a lot of people said that was really helpful just to understand where he was coming from, because he doesn't get into the nitty-gritty of politics. He actually just talks about, like, there's an issue here around influence and power.
Yeah, big themes.
This is the big problem. Not what we were going to talk about though, but I just felt it was important to balance that out with the Bridget McKenzie news. What we actually wanted to get into on Aussie politics this week though was an announcement by the Prime Minister around HECS.
Yeah, so there's 3 million Aussies who have an outstanding HECS
Way
debt.
more than I thought.
It's not really more than I thought.
Really?
The rate of Australians who go to university these days is extremely high. So, yeah, the fact that a lot of people have those debts, of course, it goes into the billions of dollars, doesn't surprise me a whole lot. However, in these cost of living pressure times, of course, the government, as we just discussed, looking to sort of extend relief to Australians. It's about lifting the amount that you need to earn before the HECS collection kicks in, before you have to start paying it back. 20% cut to HECS debts as well.
Yeah, that's probably actually the headline. We probably presented that incorrectly. Like, the big story is 20% off your HECS debt broadly, but then there's also this, there's also this idea that they would lift the earning rate that you would need before you have to start paying it back. This announcement came at an interesting time. It was just a few days before we heard from RBA Governor Michelle Bullock about the need for inflation to move further for any rate cut to be considered. She didn't even rule out rate rises.
Didn't rule it in, didn't rule it out, but that's still the phase that we're in. Inflation is still way above that target rate that the Reserve Bank has. She wants to see it down before interest rates start coming down. And as she says, if there's going to be inflation back into the system, if inflation goes up, they might need to consider rate rises again.
The coalition's gone hard for this reason against the HECS announcement, saying it will be inflationary and that it will be also unfair because, in fact, it will benefit 3 million Australians, but the remainder are the ones who will foot the bill for it. They say it's just a cash splash ahead of the election. When you look at Bullock's comments, I thought it was interesting. She was very circumspect when asked about the government's approach to spending. And I might read her quote. Sometimes it's important to read quotes because I can't really paraphrase this. But she said, "My reading, when I speak privately to the Treasurer and when I hear him speak on television and radio, is that he's fully aware of the inflationary implications of his own policies. He needs to be thinking about that because he, like me, understands that inflation is really what's hurting people at the moment."
It's pretty direct.
Well, in the context of the US election conversation we just had around people are feeling the pain and it's a big election issue, that seems to me like she's basically saying that this is an election issue for you.
Yeah, and exactly right. Also, this acknowledgement that people are hurting. Like, it's a need to actually get inflation down. People are finding it really difficult to live their lives and pay their bills. But I guess the question really is, policies like HECS relief, is that exactly what they want or otherwise, I guess?
Or otherwise. It's interesting also that we're talking about an election because Anthony Albanese made this announcement at a sort of a rally-style event in Adelaide.
Yep, Radelaide. It was all happening.
It was in a school hall.
Yeah.
It was like banners and lots of people. There was an audience.
Lots of cheering.
Yeah.
Sort of that kind of rally style seating, people around him. It did feel very much like a campaign. I saw it and my eye went straight to the banner. It's not a banner, it's that image at the front of the podium.
Oh, yeah.
The 3-word slogan made its first appearance, building Australia's future. I reckon get ready to see that more and more as Labor really heads into an election campaign.
Okay, you heard it here first, or probably not. We probably read it somewhere in some newspaper, but we...
No, that's exactly, I saw it and went, there's the election campaign.
It's funny because you said to me, did you notice where the announcement was and where the speech was? And I said, yeah, there were all those people behind him. It looked like a rally.
Yeah. I think it was a dry run.
I think it's very deliberate though. One other big story this week was, of course, the Melbourne Cup. Heaps and heaps of people searching for the Melbourne Cup on Google. So it was the second biggest story of the week by that measure. We've said it before, but I reckon anything that combines sport and fashion It's bound to be big news. Starting with fashion, a lot of colour and shorter dresses.
A lot of red.
A lot of red.
A lot of very short dresses. A lot of fake tan.
Yeah, but that's always the case. I don't feel like that's new. But I did read something that's a lot of people ditch the heels and wearing like sort of strappy sandals was acceptable.
Yeah. Okay.
I like that.
Well, post-COVID, I'm still not in heels.
No, I think that's
not going back that way.
As far as the race itself, Knight's Choice was the winner. Its odds were like about 100 to 1. Some people won big.
Yeah, if you put some money on the nose for Knight's Choice to win, you did pretty well.
I did not put money on Knight's Choice.
Did not either, no.
We were discussing as a team, though, that NUP to the Cup, which was a big campaign a number of years ago, seems to have lost a little bit of steam. You were telling me about how the vetting process to compete has been a bit of a talking point, particularly in the lead up to the Cup.
Yeah, if you were paying a lot of attention to the week before the Cup and all the commentary about who was starting and what their form was, there were 4 horses that were actually ruled out before the race commenced. And it's all down to Racing Victoria and the new protocols around checking out horse health. So they scan their limbs, they do heart checks, and as a result, there hasn't been a death of a horse since they brought those protocols in 2021. So the sense is that maybe they've actually got the animal welfare part right, and that means that people are feeling a little bit better about watching the race or supporting the race. Of course, there's going to be people who don't support it and never will, but it seems like the animal welfare part has moved on a bit.
And I think highest attendance at the Cup since pre-COVID, I was reading. So it was a beautiful day, which always helps.
Nice day at the races, yeah.
Finally, Quincy Jones. You really wanted to talk about Quincy Jones.
Yeah, I did, because I guess when I think back on all the music that I've loved, as everyone knows, I'm a sort of 80s and 90s music kid, he was really behind a lot of the big things that I liked from that time. So, look, he produced Michael Jackson's Thriller, which, of course, is the best-selling album of all time.
Yeah.
He was the 3rd highest total winner of Grammy Awards in history. So huge achievements over many decades. He was revered by everyone in the music industry, from Frank Sinatra through to Ray Charles through to Amy Winehouse. Just a really big giant of that whole scene.
91.
91.
He reached.
Yeah.
Obviously, incredibly talented, and lots of people remembering him this week. Just while we're on sort of celebrity culture, I guess, other big news, just as we sat down to record the podcast and we saw this, and we know there are people that will really care to be updated on it. 3 people have been charged in relation to the death of Liam Payne. Prosecutors say what we know so far is the group includes someone close to Liam Payne, a hotel employee and a suspected drug dealer, all facing drug supply charges.
Yeah, and the person close to Liam apparently visited him regularly during the 2-week stay that he had in Argentina. They're charged with abandonment of a person followed by death. So, yeah, lots of questions still to answer about that, but it looks like the authorities are moving.
Coming up this weekend, we are back into footy final season. It's AFLW this time around. We're like thinking we were moving into cricket, but not quite.
Not quite yet. Not until the AFLW is done. So on Friday, North Melbourne's taking on the Adelaide Crows. On Saturday, it's Fremantle versus Essendon. On Sunday, Hawthorn plays the Brisbane Lions, and Port Adelaide's up against Richmond.
North Melbourne were the minor premiers, so perhaps the ones to watch. It was also announced this week the grand final will take place on Saturday, the 30th of November. It's the first time either the AFL or AFLW grand final will be hosted at night time.
Yeah, there you go. Always been a question about whether the AFL should be at night time.
Oh, it's a whole thing.
It's a rabbit hole you can go down if you want.
It could be in Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide or Perth. It'll be wherever. The team that comes out on top after the finals period will be the ones that host it. So we will wait and see where it will be. Staying on the weekend, Sunday, it's someone's birthday.
Yeah.
Someone special in your life.
Someone very special.
12.
Tucker turns 12.
Can't believe that.
I know. He's been around.
He usually gets a new toy.
The Christmas time he gets a new turkey.
Oh, I thought that was birthday.
Yeah.
Well, it's very close together.
Birthday, usually it's a meat cake.
And he's not allowed to have that
Not this year, no.
Because he's not well enough?
He's got pancreatitis, which is a whole thing. Anyone, whether you're human or canine, will understand that issue. Anyway, he's in good nick.
What are you going to get him in? Can he have his turkey early?
No, just pat.
Oh,
Pat and a walk.
poor dog.
He'll be fine.
On Monday, the 11th of November, of course, Remembrance Day.
Yeah, of course, 11th of the 11th of the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. We pause to remember those who lost their lives or suffered in war and conflict. That timing, of course, marks when the guns fell silent on Europe's Western Front in 1918 after 4 years.
Wednesday, the Booker Prize will be announced in London. Also on Wednesday, the Coalition's Foreign Affairs spokesperson, Simon Birmingham, he's at the National Press Club, speaking on securing Australia's interests in a contested world.
And when we're talking contested world, we're talking about China.
Just China?
Pretty much.
Russia?
No, they're not contesting us.
just China. Finally, Thursday, it's King Charles's actual birthday. He's turning 76.
Yeah, so no public holiday for his actual birthday, unfortunately. That's the one that most of us celebrate in June. It's a bit different around the country. 76, he's doing pretty well.
Squiz recommends I'm vetoing it this week. Your recommendation has to live on.
Oh, wow. Because last week we said that I was going to do it this week.
No, we're leaving people hanging.
Oh, my gosh.
Because it's something more important has come up.
I can't tell you how much I love this show as well. So that's a cliffhanger for next week.
She really loves it.
I know.
But what we really need is that we are kind of a year into News Club now.
That blows my mind as well.
Yeah. But we haven't specifically asked our News Club audience to complete a survey for us.
No.
And we'd really like you to, if you can, because what we're finding, gladly, is that we have advertisers interested in Squiz Today and we have advertisers interested in News Club specifically, and they want to know if there's any differences in the audience and a bit more about you. And it means that we can keep doing this.
Yeah.
So that's one thing.
Yeah. So surveys are really important to that because, of course, podcast audiences are really hard to tell. We know a lot about our News Club and newsletter audience, but on podcast, Squizzes have been so good at doing our surveys from the podcast audience in the past. There's a little bit of, we're not above bribery for that. There will be a gift card.
Yeah, if you do the survey,
you'll go into the entry pool to win a $500 gift card.
Yeah,
$500. I can't tell you what I could do with $500 at the moment, although we're not allowed to actually enter this one, Kate, just to put on your radar.
No.
But do the survey. It'll be really short and sweet.
It's actually really short. I think it's 7 questions. It's really, really short, but it helps us no end. So if you could do that, a link is in your show notes. If you're not sure where to find those or if you want some help, just email hello@thesquiz.com.au. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. We'll be back next week.